Muy buenas tardes, bienvenidas.
Good afternoon and welcome to the last Agora of 2020, a very special year where El Día Después was born. So we can see that even in the worst years in history, we see beautiful things. It's the last Agora of the year with a especially evoking title, Possible Utopias for the Day After. Possible utopias. It might seem contradictory, but it's not. We need to be bold to dream, face utopias, to get closer to them. Is that goal that is always slipping away, but it's also the guiding principle. And that's what we'd like to deal with today. Throughout this afternoon, we'll have different sessions, and we'd like to understand how, from a positive spirit, that of El Día Después, we can help and contribute to this integral mission that all together have to tackle, so that this moment we are living through helps us achieve this transformative goal, which is essential given the pandemics. We've been talking for a while about how to take the quantum leap to get back everything that was left behind and to transform clearly those gaps that the pandemics have highlighted. And these are not new problems. They were just compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic. Somehow we became aware as a society of the dimension of our behavior. And we need to look at options of doing things differently. I think none of the social challenges can be used for these new challenges, not from the angle of any public administration. No one can tackle everything that is needed today. Neither can the private sector, businesses, social, the academia. None of us single-handedly can tackle these challenges. And that was the idea with El Día Después. That's the driving force for us. And this is what we are trying to contribute with in this big recovery. We don't like to call it rebuilding, but rather recovery that we need to tackle all together. We try to highlight the need for new skills to deeply collaborate in such a context, which is impregnated by uncertainty, which is very difficult for human beings. And we need some help, some tools to deal with that. So that's the El Día Después contribution and today's contribution. This session will be a very hands-on session where participants can feel represented in these possible utopias, and somehow we've asked participants to try and specify information, experiences, assessments that help us gain an insight on the challenges that we face and the tools that will help us overcome them. So for the first round table, we'll focus on these transformations that we see from the European and Spanish perspective, to see everything that COVID has brought and all the lessons that we can start drawing. And we like to do that by tackling these challenges between the different stakeholders who can turn these projects into a reality and to ensure that they are very transformative. For that, we have three outstanding panelists in this first roundtable, not just because of the roles they have in their organizations, but also because they work from a practical perspective to ensure that this is all possible. Today, we have Kirsten Dunlop, who is the CEO for Climate Kick, an innovation platform working at the EU level to make these processes possible.
Acompaña también Manuel de la Rocha.
We also have Manuel de la Rocha, Director of the Department of Economic Affairs and G20 of the Government of Spain. Manuel, good afternoon. Welcome. It's a huge luxury to have you here with your very packed agenda. And I'm sure the debate will be highly interesting. And then we have Carlos Matais, Director of the ITD UPM. So we'll start with the three of you. I'll start with Kirsten Dunlop. And we should remember the framework for this debate. On November 10th, finally, we could see that the European Parliament and the member states reached an agreement on the long-term budget and this package that we're talking about, an instrument for recovery and for transformation. This budget is the largest stimulus package ever financed through the EU budget and aims to mitigate the economic and social impact of the coronavirus pandemic, but also and especially aims to ensure that European economies and societies are more sustainable, resilient, and better prepared for challenges that we face. So, in this sense, Kirsten, my question is, how do we ensure that this huge effort is turned into scale transformation, taking Europe to be more strong, more resilient? What's been demanded from the EU to member states, and with your privileged experience at Climate Kick, which are the experiences that you are launching, on which first lessons have you drawn already that you could share with us to maximize the role that we all play here? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Cristina. Just to do a quick check that you can hear me fine. No problem? Okay. So I think, yeah, it's okay. I think, first of all, let me start very immediately with a response to what it is that the EU is asking of member states. As we know, with respect to the COVID recovery resilience funding, there is a request for stability, and particularly stability in, I would say, social cohesion and in emotional and social well-being terms. So specifically with respect to jobs, but with respect to interventions that are aligned with the priorities of the Green Deal and therefore with a 1.5 degree aligned world. And I think, given what is at stake, also a sense of the tangible value of the European Union in coming together in a new configuration looking forward, in alliance with the Biden administration, in alliance with a more sustainable view in China. So there is a huge opportunity here. From the perspective, however, of how does one translate this objective into reality, and how does one connect the need for creating jobs, social cohesion, well-being, and a 1.5 degree aligned world, we are talking about transformation. So here we are in a context where the choices we make now with the funding we are making available, remembering that the funding that the Commission is making available is debt. So we will need to pay it off for the next 10, 20, 30 years. Our children will be paying it off. So we need to make very careful choices and ensure that they are transformative. Speaking from the perspective of EIT Climate Kick, that has the challenge and the opportunity and the privilege to work with city governments, with regional governments, and with member states and national governments across Europe on this particular immense challenge and opportunity of systems transformation and structural change to decarbonize and to adapt. And with examples like the deep demonstration in Madrid, which has an extraordinary wealth of opportunity in both job creation, but also in envisioning a sustainable future, very much the utopias that are being described and the power to inspire and capture the imagination of the public. If I just take that example and think of some of the others in other cities in Europe, in regions in Poland, in the Basque Country, Valencia, thinking about the work we are doing in France, in Nouvelle-Aquitaine, in Scotland, and so on. The learnings I would pull out to start this session are 5. First of all, it is essential to take a systemic approach, not only to use the words, but to translate the words into practice. And the words in practice mean not running straight to solutions, but taking time to understand what is at stake, understand the challenge of transforming a whole city, of transforming whole agricultural regions in systemic terms. What is a cause and effect of one thing and another thing? What are the obstacles? What are the resources, the assets, the cultural identities that are involved? And to design an implementation approach that understands no individual action will be sufficient. We need a connected multiplicity of actions, multiple connected interventions, trying different solutions for every single different challenge, testing them together and implementing them together. So this does not mean a sequential selection of winning projects gradually implemented. It means choosing and making a portfolio in which many things are implemented simultaneously and many things are tested simultaneously with different solutions to look for the possible connections and relationships between them. This gives us a chance to understand how to change water and waste and mobility and heat stress and use organic materials and change financial mechanisms and incentives and laws and policy and regulation and behavioral norms around consumption all together. So there are mechanisms for doing that, and the Madrid City Deep demonstration is a good showcase for that. There are ways of structuring a portfolio that provides a much more robust implementation of funding into a whole connected intervention. The next most important point is collaboration. This kind of work that crosses boundaries, it crosses industry sectors, it crosses different solution spaces, it crosses zones of the city, it crosses competitive relationships in agricultural zones or in industrial value chains, requires radical collaboration. And this means we need incentives for participatory governance, for shared ownership, for a sense of participation in a commons. Whether the commons is a public commitment to 2030 goals, to energy, national climate and energy plans, but it also needs the structures of participatory governance and shared ownership and the incentives for collaboration across boundaries. This again can be structured at the level of the portfolio and the implementation governance, but it is essential. Without that wide system of actors involved, we have a lot of learnings working, for example, with the government of Slovenia that wishes to take the entire country to circular economy by 2030. And the time invested so far has been to genuinely have 12 ministries in government really working together on a common plan and a common pool of funding. The third point is to close the loop. To close the loop between innovation, research and innovation actions to create jobs, to support well-being, to try different technologies, to introduce new economic models, and connect those actions to decision-making. This is absolutely essential. We have too often invested our innovation efforts in generating solutions, but not in really connecting them to policy-making and decision-making in the form of options that can support commitment of capital, commitment of procurement change, procurement law change, commitment of planning and policy with lines of sight that are coherent with government decision-making frames. It's a very important part of the design of the implementation. The fourth point is that COVID recovery and resilience funding gives us an opportunity to build the thing we most need, which is a capability and a capacity to adapt and to innovate in the face of constant shocks, of constant stress, which we will have. And here I think it is essential to understand, for example, in Madrid, you will hear the learning around the importance of investing in systematic knowledge sharing, systematic training and capability building for a common, to work with a common framework, with a common language, to build a common vision, and to allow for slack. Something that is about the creation of a budget of possibilities We cannot afford to build transformation like we build a kitchen, where every single joint is tightly connected. We need to build it like we're building a ship. You pull the joints, to pull the beams together gradually with looseness and with play, so that there is space to learn. And we have the capability to learn and learn fast. And we need that at every level, from school-age children learning to think differently, to professionals who have been managing particularly industries who need to requalify professionally and learn new skills, and to intergenerational partnership between younger and older members of the community to shape transformation together. And the fifth point, the final point, we cannot do this if we are only applying our rational minds, our engineering minds. This is about acts of imagination. It's the reason why I so support and endorse the vision of this roundtable in utopias. We need the imaginatory possibilities and the power of imagination to help us go beyond the limits that we continue to impose on ourselves, to help us imagine that it is possible, to see possibility, and because of a sense of something, of being part of something that is bigger than ourselves, of working to make something that feels impossible now possible. And that is very much what we are talking about when we are talking about a 1.5 degree aligned world. Where we are now, it's close to impossible. We're going to have to do something extraordinary to achieve it. And so the topic of utopia is very appropriate. Thank you, Cristina.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much, Kirsten. Gracias por tu claridad.
Thank you for your clarity when summarizing very complex concepts. The magical word is connections. Connections between stakeholders, approaches, and also connections to imagine these utopias. This should be also mixed up with the more practical level, reality, the day-to-day, the laws, the plans and budgets. And well, if there is someone who knows about this, is Manuel de la Rocha, who is in charge of seeing how this becomes a reality in figures, in plans, in laws. So Manuel, it's a pleasure having you today and being able to listen to you, because it is essential that we understand how innovation, imagination, connection, and utopias can become a reality. So, in that sense, Europe has asked member states to prepare plans, projects. From your privileged position, what do you think is the role that different actors play when committing in launching such plans? And which are the institutional questions or collaboration instruments or fora are being launched to ensure that these connections are successful? Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Agora, for this kind invitation to this panel where we're trying to envisage a utopian future. And I was listening with high interest to Kirsten, with very inspiring points that should lead us to reflect and to think outside of the box. That was very inspiring. The reality that EU governments face is how to turn all this into specific plans, specific national plans that are being implemented with real results in just a few years, taking into consideration all the administration infrastructure that can be more or less robust here and there. In Spain is a very decentralized country, and this adds layers of complexity when implementing huge amounts of funds in a short term. But I think that our country has a huge opportunity. Before answering your question, I have three reflections. Well, first, yes, the EU got it right. And I think we should feel proud of the response by the EU to a very deep crisis that came overnight and that allows us to take a leap forward which is very inspiring for us who believe in this Europe, not in past Europes. And they were not as interesting as this one. And also I liked when you said this is not about reconstruction, this is about transformation. Of course, we need to get out of the crisis, but taking a leap forward that takes a decade forward. And here we're talking about climate change and the implementation of the European Green Deal, which should be at the forefront of our priorities when we talk about resilience. In Spain, obviously, inclusion, cohesion, and closing the gender gap. And then thirdly, at the same time, we need to cater for current urgency. Is this a plan for the future and only for the future? Of course not. This is also for current issues and job creation. And I also like when you said capabilities. For us, this means future investments at the same time that we create quality jobs. And there are many gaps related to environmental transition. We're talking about niches such as rehabilitation, digitization, connectivity in rural areas, bringing broadband, 5G to these rural areas to boost economies. So this exercise is imagining a utopian future, but a thrilling and exciting one, and at the same time creating jobs today, and also with a focus on training. Also, regarding your question, what's the role of stakeholders? Well, they play an important role. The European Commission, which approves the plans and with whom you have to negotiate, and that's not easy, they attach great importance to consultancy. They want to make sure that all plans and components go through an assessment and consultancy process. How? At different levels. First, in a regional state like Spain, we are very often in contact with the regions. We met with local councillors. We are creating a forum for regions to participate and also local entities. That's important because the regions and the local entities have powers and competencies in many areas. And then we need the social agents. We've created a forum where trade unions, the government, and businesses get together to explain and to interact. And thirdly, we have the high-level fora that existed before or that were reactivated in different sectors with different ministries, explain the plans in detail. For example, the 2025 digital plan in Spain, the route for the green hydrogen with specific actors and stakeholders. For example, the science minister called me the other day to explain how the council went, where they explained which were the plans to use these funds. So it's very important to mobilize all the talent, all the capabilities, resources in our society, be it the private sector, universities, technological centers, the third sector, and to ensure that they all participate, because resources coming from Europe are very important indeed, but our needs, if we want to take this step forward, are much higher. So we need to mobilize first private resources together with EU resources, be it investment in companies or bringing foreign capital. And then also we need to use our imagination to connect all these projects that we're looking for. We're talking about digital and green areas and link it with science and innovation. And we have a series of consultations. For example, as you know, the plan has a very green perspective. Most of the resources should concentrate on the green area, and then 20% should be for digital. And then there are 7 initiatives. 1, rehabilitation of energy. We want to take a leap forward to reduce CO2, create jobs, and transform our cities. How do we ensure that we can massively rehabilitate this? So we've done consultations. We've organized high-level video conferences with the private sector, with associations, with experts to figure out which solutions we need. Because we need to think out of the box to ensure that citizens and neighbors are involved. So we need to widen the collaboration possibilities, and we attach great importance to the PPPs, private sectors working with universities, the third sectors, and they're involved in projects. We need to create enthusiasm so that everyone can contribute. And then, in this sense, we'll make things easier for the PPPs, and we will also offer a great deal of funds for science and innovation, which are essential together with research. These are all very important for this government. So we are developing new forms of participating with the private sector, associations, with scientists, and I'd like to highlight the missions, the innovation missions that we launched recently. This is a concept that we already know in Europe, but it is new in Spain. The idea of researching into and financing and working together around common goals, common challenges, such as climate change. So based on these challenges, we would pool together resources, private, public, civil society, to ensure that we find efficient and imaginative ways to resolve these problems. So all in all, participation is of the essence. Well, thank you very much, Manuel. I think it's very clear. Participation is essential, but if I have to highlight something, is this state of enthusiasm. That's the key. We need to create enthusiasm collectively, public, private, social, knowledge, not just academia. And enthusiasm will take us forward in that direction. Will let us tackle issues and challenges that we hadn't seen so clearly before. For example, the housing rehabilitation and renovation. There's a great deal of experiences, but are we actually able to take on this challenge of 500,000 new households? That requires a great deal of innovation, but also a collective state of enthusiasm. And then now you've passed the ball to Carlos Matais from the ITD of the UPM. And he's also a big fan of the EU missions. And Carlos, these missions try to offer solutions to some of the main challenges that we face today. We're talking about biomedical issues, cancer research, pandemics, the huge challenge of climate change, the challenge of climate neutral cities. So huge challenges that require huge mobilization of resources and enthusiasm. So this research should be intertwined with recovery and resilience plans. So from your experience at ITD and other platforms such as El Día Después, how can we ensure that these different programs from the EU can articulate all these projects from different sectors? And to start with, can you give us an advance regarding the deep demo mentioned by Kirsten, so that We know what this all about. Thank you, Cristina. Well, I'll start with the beginning. We will achieve this with enthusiasm. I'm listening to you and I am enthusiastic. We are starting to see that this is possible, that in Europe, new possibilities are happening, whereby public and private collaboration goes beyond the mere transactions. And this leads us to think that we should see this as a society, a common challenges, so that we can deeply collaborate. And this is not that far off. And also, really, I think when we talk about this, well, many can say, yeah, this is really hard, we are not prepared. But well, we have no other option. So European missions for sustainability, I think they are the first and really good response to speed up the fulfillment of the SDGs with a very stimulating program. And also, I think they are nurtured by pioneering experiences such as Climate Kick and the deep demonstration. And this help identify the type of innovation that we need right now to exit this suicidal path of this production and consumerism model, bringing us to collapse. So we need to use the best of innovation, technological, but also social and financial innovation to ensure that stakeholders and actors act together in collaboration. What do we need? We need an organizational infrastructure that we lack in our society, in our institutions, where we're prepared to compete and specialize. But now we realize that we need other structures which are complementary. So we need to be ambidextrous. On the one side, we need to work based on the heritage that we have, looking for the important reforms. And this is, in the work that we're doing in Spain, it's impressive. We're talking about the state, public administration, and specialists. That's on the one side of the collective intelligence. And on the other side, we need to create this inertia, enthusiasm, so that this project is a truly social one. So we share the Olympic spirit for change. And as we will see today, we'll have experiences that show that we can create a tissue, a social tissue, where collaboration is actually done at a deep level and continuously, not just in a consultation process at the beginning, but also anything leading us. There will be plenty of discovery spaces, correction spaces, identifying possibilities, and plenty of spaces for shared learning. For example, the mission for cities, 100 climate neutral cities by 2030. In just a year, the panel has reached the conclusion that that can only be done with citizens. We'll need a great deal of regulation, technology, but we will need the citizens with this spirit of social change. And the citizens should not just be there at initial consultations, but they should participate continuously, because the change we need is above all a social change. Well, thank you, Carlos. I think that's the cherry on the cake of this excellent panel. I really like those connections. Thank you very much, Manuel. My takeaway is this collective state of enthusiasm, and then also the pragmatic vision of how do we do this. Thank you, Carlos, as usual, for your firm commitment with this radical and profound collaboration mechanisms. This involves thinking together. And this is the way to follow these utopias that should be always kind of far off, but not too far away. Well, thank you to our three panelists. I could talk with you for the whole afternoon, but time is of the essence. And now I would like to give the floor to Gonzalo Van Huy to moderate the next panel, where two experiences for transformative alliance incubators will be presented so that we can see how we can turn this into a reality. So please switch off your cameras and give the floor to Gonzalo. Thank you, Cristina, and thank you for this fantastic start of the Agora. I'd like to ask Olga, Valentin, and Diego to switch on their cameras. So in this session, we'll be talking about incubators, a very zoological term, but which are related to the tone and culture that we like to boost in initiatives such as the ones today. It's in days like today, shocks of all types are transformational opportunities. Shocks bring a new window for change in our society. They place us in a more open collective spirit. And sometimes, very often, is a pie in the sky. But if we are able to turn this into a reality, to turn this opportunity into a reality, and to make use of the elements and to turn these emotions, these collective emotions, through specific tools and turn them into projects to channel the transformation, then we will create different societies that are the ones we had before a pandemic such as COVID. And that's the role of incubators. They are innovative. They create alliances which are unlikely. They are trial and error exercises. And they try to bring together to our reality the best ideas, to bring them to scale, to replicate them. And this is what's being done with the incubators and that we will see today. And to talk about this, we have two people who know a great deal about innovation, and then one person who understands very well how this is linked to the debate on opportunities and financial and political opportunities. Olga Kordas is the director of Viable Cities. Then we will have Valentin Alfaya, president of the Spanish Green Growth Group and director of sustainability at Ferrovial. And then Diego Monjux, director and co-founder at Silo Company, who will close off the conversation. So without further ado, I'll start with you, Olga. I hope you can hear me properly.
Yes, I hear you. Do you hear me?
Yes, very well. Thank you very much, Olga.
Excellent.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm so happy to share with you the experience of Viable Cities in Sweden. So Viable Cities were a strategic innovation program of Sweden, pioneering the mission climate neutral cities by 2030 with a good life for all within planetary boundaries. So we at Viable Cities were a member organization with members from so-called quadruple helix, which means that we have organizations from public sector, industry, from different sectors, from energy, construction, ICT, transportation and mobility, consultancy, we have architecture bureaus and others, as they are both large multinational as Ericsson and also small startup companies, those ones who want to drive change. We have also university and research institutes from the whole countries. And last but not least, we have societal organizations. And this civil society organization, because our philosophy is a holistic approach to sustainable urban development with people-centered approach, where citizen engagement is very important enabler for the transition. And then I have mentioned the word mission, and also the colleagues before were mentioning missions. And this is a new instrument in the European Union's Research and Innovation Program, Horizon Europe. So the missions means that we formulate bold goals and visions of what should be achieved, and also when this should be achieved. And this is to join the forces of different actors in society, and this is to provide directionality and intentionality to our joint transition journey. The mission innovation approach was inspired by Apollo mission, Man on the Moon. But we should be very careful and recognize that Apollo mission was a very technocratic mission. And already in 1977, the Nielsen wrote a book which was called Moon and Ghetto. And he was saying that we are very good in technological innovation, we could put the man on the moon, but we have not managed in years to fight poverty and fight ghetto. So our mission, so we believe that the mission is an important tool, but it's not by default, but by design. And we need to do this design of missions together. So our mission in Viable Cities is connecting transition to climate neutral cities, but also social sustainability, which is very important. And how do we do that? So we have 9 Swedish cities with us that decided to take a lead and accelerate climate and sustainability transitions. Those cities are both largest cities in Sweden, as Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Malmö. Malmö is very interesting because they are working both with us and with Climate Kick deep demonstration, as Kirsten mentioned and described. So, but we also have smaller cities with less experience and less muscle for change, but with high ambitions and enthusiasm to reach the mission. So those cities are not working by their own, but we have co-creation support and orchestration with Viable Cities Transition Lab. And then we do a lot of work together just for co-creation, and also to have reflexive learning between cities and between different actors. And this is for dissemination of lessons learned, for joint exploration, and also to disseminate the results with other cities in Sweden and globally. So now we will have the call for proposal, so that we will have not only 9 cities, but 20 cities in Sweden. And the most innovative tool in within Viable Cities is so-called Climate City Contract. The contract, which is politically binding, and it's between municipalities and governmental agencies and Viable Cities. And we are very happy that the first in Europe and globally Climate City contracts were signed last Friday in Sweden. So it's it's really great achievement for us and for the Swedish cities and for the Swedish government, the governmental agencies, but this is only the first step forward. So in those Climate City contracts, cities are describing their commitment, how to accelerate transition. For example, Uppsala, city of Uppsala is saying that now they have ambitions and the need to accelerate, like to reduce CO2 emissions 4 times more per year than they're doing now. And this is very high ambition goal. And then we are together would support cities with that, with both with funding, with coordination of funding, and with coordination of innovation support, and also the different policies and change in legislation that is necessary to accelerate transition. So we are very happy to collaborate with Spanish cities and with Spanish organization. We have started some great discussions and conversation. I'm really looking forward to that, both to share our experience, but also learn from the great job you are doing, and in particular in the deep demonstration project. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Olga. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olga. My takeaway would be the idea of the description of the social contract, which is so exciting. You talk about missions by design. So not all missions are good, not all goals are good. The idea of transformation, of defining priorities based on public criteria, that's essentially one of the main challenges that we face as a society. So now I'll give the floor to Valentin to make the most of the time. Valentin, you know the El Día Después experience. You have a long story with the creation of consortium and different alliances. And I'd like you to explain what's different in this that we are living now, and we should be living now in terms of new alliances when it comes to more conventional alliances. What's the paper of the private sectors? Yes, it's true that when we talk about incubators, the first thing that comes to mind is the startup incubators. But now we are talking about something more innovative. We are talking about alliance incubators or project incubators, transformational project incubators. As Kirsten and Manuel said before, what we need are big transformational projects that can change the model. And this is extremely complex at the city level. That's why we need to advance the model of incubator and start working on incubators that first are incubators for meetings, for alliances. And secondly, they generate contents projects that can transform reality. And these are both closely intertwined because transforming a city is a daunting task. The reality is complex. Also are the solutions. But furthermore, we are talking about transforming systems which are interconnected with many agents. An alliance incubator has nothing to do with the run-of-the-mill consortium that we see in the private sector. Consortiums are done ad hoc, and they have a temporary nature, but they lack the method that we have in such an incubator, or like we have at El Día Después or the Deep Demonstration in Madrid. So these platforms have, on the one side, a systematic method and a systemic approach and holistic approach to problems. And secondly, private entities such as Ferrovial allows us to access something that Matthijs calls the unlikely partners, which are essential to activate these changes, but it would be difficult for a company such as Ferrovial to meet with these partners elsewhere. And that's why these alliances and transformational projects are the best idea, are very innovative and are critical, especially in the current crisis. As you said before, we need huge transformations. And these transformations are only possible after a huge crisis. And we've lived a huge crisis. Now is the moment for the big change. But to do that, we need tools. So it turns out that now we have this extraordinary budget from the EU. Well, we realize that we need to invest properly to transform our model. And then we realize that our tools are not ready. We don't have these platforms. So that's why it's important to kickstart all of this. And that's why Madrid, together with Climate Kick, has been working for 2 years on a seminal project. That's the platform that we developed at the Polytechnical University of Madrid, together with the Municipality of Seville in Madrid. And that's essential to understand how big alliances can work, how these huge machines can create transformational projects. And these are the projects that we need to access finance, to invest and to change the model. Because, as you said, now is the moment to change the model. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Valentin, and thank you for sticking to time. It's quite difficult to tell everything that you are telling us in such a short time. Well, Valentin, you are sharing an experience that in the context of cities, as Olga said before, Now it all makes sense. Actors that didn't used to work together, they are contributing the best capabilities and skills. That's the experience of El Día Después, which has entered this incubator stage after a phase of reflection. And we've brought together the will of everyone. And now we have one essential question. As actors who are not used to quickly and competitively enter into cooperation with different beings, so to say, when we're talking about the EU funds, well, is there a space for that? Or this is all about words and then nothing. And then we will go back to the run-of-the-mill reconstruction where the usual suspects will run faster and will have a privileged position. And that's my question for Diego. How much of all this is valid in the context of the reconstruction and resiliency plan of the EU? And what should we do so that these proposals are successful in such a competitive context? Well, thank you, Gonzalo. I'll have to stick to the time as well. If the question is, well, all these ideas, all the incubators have a fit, the answer is yes, but. Yes, regarding the big objectives, but the but is that they need to find the administrative avenue to achieve the goals. And well, that's what the practitioner is all about. It should be accompany the public entities, and we will be there in September 2023 when we're talking about this 140 billion euro fund. And well, and this should be committed before 31st of December 2023. We need to understand that the other person on the other side of the table will be thinking about this deadline, and how to implement these funds. As we said, there's a great deal of funds. We're talking about 5% of the total funds for Spain, for example. And we shouldn't forget that we should find the right administrative path, because all this is limited by the talk of public entities, agreements, calls, tenders. So we should move from the poetry of goals to the poetry of implementation. Well, but we should say here that the government is bold. Since January 2021, there will be funding for this, and then there's the Council of Ministers that will be passing a royal decree to speed up this process. This is very important, as you explained before. The administration is what it is, and these are the guys at the other side of the table. When we come up with the alliances, with the projects mentioned by Valentin, the cooperatives, and on the other side, we will have someone asking about implementation with the administrative language. So in order to have public and private collaboration, at some point we need collaboration from the private sector. And that's why, well, regarding what these proposals need to be successful, well, might sound paradoxical, they should step into the shoes of the manager. We have the European funds, and when we have the goals, national plans, but then the instruments, the calls, tenders, new instruments, this needs to be translated into administrative language, and then help the manager, if you will allow me, to ensure that these requirements meet the eligibility criteria. We shouldn't forget that during 3 years we'll be racing against the clock. There will be a tension between efficacy and efficiency. Efficacy in the use of funds and efficiency in the capability of being transformative. We shouldn't forget that part of these ideas that are complex are also complex to manage. So these will compete with other projects which are not as transformative, but maybe which are very efficient. And this investment might also be very needed. And well, the more complex and transformative the projects, the more maturation time they will need. Probably they won't come in the first few months, but then in the last few months. And we might start with the easy projects because it depends on how we implement the funds. So we need to be realistic. Well, Diego, thank you very much. That's essential. This is very realistic. But this is not discouraging. This should be a driving force for us to look for alliances, to ensure that we have these incubator formats helping how to manage and define more intelligently the projects, looking for people like Diego who are helping, who are becoming the Sherpas in this process. But we've shared some examples. Well, you see, that's it. We don't have much time. And this is just the tapas when you go to a restaurant. But then if you go to Viable Cities, you can go for the main course, and we only have the tapas that we are showing you here. If you go to the Viable Cities website, you have the main course, and then you can see all the experiences on the website. So this alternative is real, is happening in our cities, in our emergency systems, in our social protection system, and we have the chance with this EU program and the national programs to turn this into a reality. So a million thanks, Olga, Valentin, Diego, and now I'll give the floor to Leire Pagin, chairing the third table about driving forces in this regeneration. Thank you, Gonzalo, and thank you to all panelists. If you follow the session from the start, we've touched upon, well, we moved from the needed utopia that come with us in the last few weeks with this communication campaign that we launched in parallel to this event, and we showed the realities that before they used to be utopias. And these help to focus, to use the resources. And this transformational utopia can be brought to the ground. So we've seen a dose of reality. For example, what it means, the climate kick for the EU. And then we see that there is space for public and private alliances. And also, it's important to see the flexibility of administration, knowing, as Diego said, that administration has sometimes complex tools, and we need to find the right balance between innovation, efficiency, transparency, and these are the challenges. And to yield results, we need to get on the ground. And that's why we have three important collaborators from the local administration. We have Santiago Saura, and from the private sector, Gregory Cascante or Mónica Oviedo, are landing, bringing to the ground all these connections. We've talked about how to transform all actors, the participation that we need, but how do we do this? Do we have already examples on the ground? Do we have public and private examples that are inspiring examples? As some participants asked in the chat box, can we, when we talk about regeneration, energy regeneration, can we scale up projects that were used in one city to a city with different reality? And this is what I will be asking the next three panelists. I'll start with you, Gregory, with the experiences that from your alliance you are using to land, to bring projects to the ground, to incubate. If we can use the El Día Después terminology to connect the private sector in projects that bring a specific result and that allow for a narrative that ensure that the green economy is not either or with the job creation, but rather can be a good exit out of the unemployment problem. And how this become a reality with your projects? Well, thank you, Leire. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I was reading Banerjee and Dulfo's latest book, the last two Nobel laureates, about good economics in hard times. I was surprised because they said that economic politics and economics in policies should focus on transitions. So economic politics should focus on transitions. They say that these are the moments of rupture when we see energetic changes, and then we see the tables being turned between the winners and the losers. We suddenly see many more losers. And I was thinking that we should all agree that the pandemic is an accelerator, a compounder of our capability of creating new losers, which are mostly linked to the service sector. So from my humble perspective, the idea of the project of platform for the green economy is all about reducing the impact of transitions in the social area and using the green economy being created. And some of them are the results of the usual market dynamics, and others are boosted by all the synergies, and to use this so that losers are not left behind. That would be the philosophical idea. The three main ideas behind this platform is the most operational elements. Well, we have three main anchors. First, creating a connection between new green jobs and losers of the previous crisis, so to say. So we're talking about an accompaniment system and a requalification process, allowing to readapt profiles and having a firm commitment with digitization. Digitization is of the essence in any project, but also a central element to reduce the digital gap. Without digital autonomy of the losers, there will be no proper recovery. But we are not naive. We know this is hard later. If you will allow me, well, before I was managing the mines, I had to close down many mines and I had to find a job for many miners. And I can tell you there was no easy fit, but it was possible. We managed to do that. So that's encouraging. And therefore we should try this and try this differently. And that's what the El Día Después has brought. By listening to Valentin, I don't know if it was Gonzalo who talked about the unlikely partners. We are an example of unlikely partners. It was just 4 unlikely partners, and then this was catapulted by El Día Después. First, the Polytechnical University of Madrid for requalification, ICIUS. The company I lead for intermediation, and then Codex, working on the environmental side, working with strategic design, and then ITD, which is the driving force behind the whole process. And well, there are 2 main actors here, businesses and cities, and we'll start talking with these 2 actors. So we'll talk with people like Santiago. Well, excellent. That's an excellent cue, because we'll give the floor to Santiago to share your reflection. We need to connect. You were talking about 4 unlikely partners. I'm sure we need more than 4. So that this utopia is a reality. And in the pandemic, we've seen that a global pandemic that has hit us very hardly and has rocked the boat and has shared spaces for agreement, consensus, and for exchanging experiences that can be useful elsewhere and can be scaled up elsewhere. And it's very important, the connection between cities, but also between urban and rural. Now, I'd like to hear about your specific projects in Madrid, for example, and how you've used the El Día Después to connect specific projects between cities and therefore stimulating mutually so that you can understand and learn from things that worked and things that didn't work, and to become a catalyzer for other cities, for other towns. How do you do this? Well, thank you, Leire, for this wonderful preface. We're talking about alliances and connections, and we're talking about cities. We have 3 levels. First, alliances between actors. Cities are very complex systems, and the functioning is very complex. Secondly, when we talk about decarbonizing cities, it's essential not just the challenge between actors, or rather, not just the alliances between actors, but also alliances between challenges. So the route to climate neutrality comes hand in hand with other challenges, or with solving other challenges, such as closing the inequality gap, boosting the economy, recovering of the crisis, or citizens' well-being. They should be as cross-cutting as possible so that all actors, all citizens can benefit from this. And the 3rd level is the alliance between cities. Madrid and other cities are working in preparing projects so that they can get European funds. Or, for example, working with the missions, with the city missions in the Horizon Europe. So it doesn't make any sense that each city does this individually. We need to share experiences so that this works well in all cities. And this is the perspective I was talking about. For example, in Madrid, we have Climate Kick and also the community of cities of El Día Después. Now, talking about specific projects, we are talking about sustainable mobility, rehabilitation of households and neighborhoods, and also energy, self-consumption, PV, heat electrification, and for example, in sustainable mobility, from El Día Después, we've launched the flattening the curve of the peak hour to reduce the number of uses of public transport and private transport in specific peak times by coordinating and by applying flexi time, for example. And this requires all stakeholders, the council, municipality, trade unions, universities, and then also at the regional level, because we're talking about the city, the metropolitan city, but also there are municipalities around the city. So in Madrid, this was called We Move, We Take Care. And we've shared some experiences with cities such as Barcelona, with similar context. And then regarding households and neighborhoods, we've worked very closely because this is a cross-cutting area. First, we need to work on energy efficiency of the households, but then also self-consumption with PV. So the benefits are the reduction of the emissions, decarbonization, but also the revalorization and the restoration of the value, of the importance of the areas, also reducing energy poverty. And this can potentially create a huge deal of jobs and cater for the needs of a city. And such a challenge that we are working on in Madrid, Seville, involves administration, businesses, property communities, and also financial institutions, so that we can have the correct mechanisms, but also the public sector. So all in all, these would be the example and specific working examples that we have in this community of cities of El Día Después. Thank you, Santiago. Before we said we needed collective enthusiasm, and if I know a enthusiastic person, that's Mónica Oviedo. We've spoken with her many times. And, well, we share on Red, Iberdrola, projects for the creation of narratives against depopulation. As you mentioned, we need, well, to fight again this depopulation in central areas in Spain, in rural areas, and maybe we could share some examples in what we call the empty Spain. And we have some examples of collaboration between organizations. And maybe you could explain how you, from companies, how can you bring to the ground projects that are interesting to your company, to your business, but also which are aligned with the transformation and with the social demands. Well, thank you, lady, for calling me an enthusiastic person. I think this is contagious, and now more than ever is a virus I don't want vaccination against. So we've been working for 9 months in the El Día Después incubator, and I'd like to highlight that we've created such a trusting environment that all actors work in a very innovative way, and with the public sector, with the private sector, as Santiago and Gregor explained, we are maximizing our contribution to the agenda. We are developing the alliance of the SDG 17 partnerships for the goals. All the businesses, participating businesses, we have our work, our goals, initiatives in rural areas. We work in Asturias, north of Spain. But I think what's most important is that we've managed to go beyond the limits. And we managed to work on projects that can seem that don't have a direct impact. And nothing could be further from the truth. We are working on inequality, a new economic model for El Día Después, and from the onset of the crisis, we are working on a new social contract. We've developed a great deal of initiatives which connect with others, such as that of Gregory's, and also that of Santiago's. And I think it's important, this task that we are advancing when it comes to the social contract. And the Agora that we are already preparing for January, which is related to this one, because utopias are possible, we need to bring in the new generation. So tomorrow we have a meeting with 15, 16-year-olds to listen to them, to see what kind of future they want to see in the job sector. It seems that this doesn't affect us directly, but nothing could be further from the truth. Another example. We have a new observatory, and now we are analyzing whether it can be interesting. We try to see how a digital observatory can use non-financial information for SMEs. And again, this is management tools for SMEs so that they can see the benefits of providing information on all those details which are non-financial. And again, the private sector will be able to get closer to them to see whether they are meeting with the sustainability goals, and they will be more accessible. They will have more access to European funds if they do. And also, as Kirsten explained, this is all about imagination, connection, looking beyond. And I like to highlight this trusting climate that we are creating for regeneration, so that we don't go back to square one. Excellent. Well, throughout the afternoon, we had more than 230 participants asking questions in the chat box. But we've been bringing things to the ground. First, regarding Europe, we had the European vision on the funds and the tools that make this possible. Second, how can we do this from Spain, from a complex reality, public institution, the value of academia, knowledge, civil society, private sector, funding innovation and transformation. And we've realized that this can be easily identified with the challenges ahead, as we've seen in this last roundtable. These projects are already yielding results, showing that this is not just desirable, but also possible. And the El Día Después alliance is not just but a space created in a short time, but also already yielding results. I'd like to conclude with some takeaway messages that have permeated the session. The goal at the end of the day is to regenerate. And this means keeping what's good, scaling up elsewhere, but also changing what didn't work. We've also spoken about collaboration. In the pandemic, we've learned that an actor, be it public or private, won't be able to regenerate things single-handedly. Neither will countries. And that's why this European level is a huge opportunity, but we shouldn't forget about other realities in middle and lower income countries, for example, South America, where again we see realities from South America, from Latin America, that need to connect with the European reality. And we shouldn't forget about them. We've spoken about incubating, which is all about hosting, nurturing, accompanying, developing. So these have a generational impact. And here it's very important to link knowledge, private actors and society with the decision makers. And this goes beyond that a mere financial change or technological change. It's all about a cultural and social change, a change of how we understand the working together. And we will need to listen, to build new narratives, and also striking a balance with different realities, the urban and the rural realities, without neglecting biases and inequalities that can be compounded if we don't regenerate the system. And also, we've spoken about the gender inequality. If we don't take this into consideration, we will fall back into the same trap. So we need to regenerate, keeping the good, changing the bad. At the end of the day, and with this we will conclude, deep crisis, transitions are the moment for change. In spite of all the challenges, of all the complexities, difficulties, this is the moment for change. We face challenges, but also opportunities and instruments. We have utopias, but also realities showing that working together, we can make them possible. So again, we urge you to work with us in these possible utopias, in the regeneration of El Día Después, because we need more of you. And we need to build a collective culture that belongs to everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you once again for sharing this space with us. Thank you.